coffee in my mug had gone cold before I noticed. That happens a lot now. I pour a cup, sit down, and then the thoughts come, and before I know it, an hour has passed, and the coffee is sitting there, untouched, like a small, quiet accusation on the kitchen table. It was the third Tuesday in October when my son-in-law first brought it up. We were standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I taught my daughter to make butter tarts when she was 9 years old. The same kitchen where she did her homework spread out across the table, where we stayed up too late talking after her father passed. My son-in-law was wearing that vest he always wears, the gray one, and he was looking at the property survey I had framed on the wall, not because it was art, because it was information. "You ever think about what you'd do with this place?" he said. "You know, eventually." I told him I thought I'd keep living in it, as people generally do with their homes. He laughed. He has a way of laughing that doesn't reach his eyes. That was 14 months before everything fell apart. Looking back, I can see now that the conversation in my kitchen wasn't small talk. It was the first stone being laid. I should tell you about the property because you need to understand what it meant, not what it was worth. And it was worth something. There's no use pretending otherwise. A lakefront lot outside of Muskoka doesn't come cheaply, even when you've owned it for 40 years. But what it meant. My husband Boyd and I bought it in 1986. We were 34 years old. We had almost nothing in our savings account. And we bought it anyway because Boyd had grown up going to the lake every summer with his family, and he said he wanted that for our daughter too. He said he wanted her to have a place she could always come back to. Boyd died 11 years ago. The property stayed. It was the last thing he ever signed his name to that still had any warmth left in it. My daughter grew up on that lake. She learned to swim there. She had her 16th birthday there, a bonfire on the dock, a dozen teenagers I didn't know half of. When she left for university in Halifax, she cried in the car and made me promise we'd still go every August. We did, for years, even after she met him. His name was Brent. She met him at some networking event in Toronto, which tells you something about him right from the start. He was polished in the way that certain men are polished. Smooth answers, good shoes, a habit of steering conversations so subtly you didn't notice until you were already somewhere you hadn't meant to go. My daughter thought he was ambitious. I thought he was calculating, but I kept that to myself. Because she was 37, she was in love, and I had promised myself I would not be that mother. The text message, "Hey, Mona Thursday, Mona Thursday, Mona Thursday, Mona Thursday, Mona Thursday, my rose." November. Noldina Thursday, Mona Thureth. That should have told me something too. I threw myself into the wedding planning because that's what you do. I drove down to Toronto 3 times to go to dress fittings. I spent 2 evenings on the phone with her going through catering menus. I sent checks, 2 of them, significant ones because the venue they had chosen was beyond what they could cover on their own, and she asked me quietly, without him on the phone, if I could help. I said yes. Of course I said yes. What I did not know, what I would not know until much later from her friend Tammy, who felt guilty enough to eventually tell me, was that it was Brent who told her to ask me, that he had already factored my contribution into their budget, that he had in fact told her exactly how much to ask for. The wedding was on a Saturday in late June. It was held at a restored barn property south of Georgian Bay, the kind of venue that charges you separately for the tables. It was beautiful. I will give him that. Whatever Brent was, he had taste. I had arrived the day before for the rehearsal dinner, and things had felt not wrong exactly, but pressurized. My daughter was distracted in a way that went beyond normal wedding nerves. She kept glancing at Brent when she spoke to me, the way you check a thermostat. He was friendly to me at dinner. Arm around the shoulder, top up of wine, compliments on my dress. warm in the way that a transaction feels warm before it's completed. The morning of the wedding, I saw her alone for maybe 20 minutes while her hair was being done. She seemed happy. She told me I looked beautiful. I told her she was going to be wonderful. I meant it. I still mean it, even now. The ceremony was in the afternoon. I sat in the front row. I cried the appropriate amount. Her dress was everything. The reception was where it changed. It started subtly. I was seated at a table with Boyd's sister and her husband, two of my old friends from Sudbury, and one couple I didn't know. Perfectly respectable. But the table was off to one side, tucked near the edge of the tent, and my daughter's table, the head table, was at the other end of the room. I thought nothing of it at first. These things happen at large weddings. But over the course of the evening, I noticed that my daughter did not come to me. She made rounds. I watched her move from table to table, hugging, laughing, leaning in for photos. She came close once. She was maybe 3 tables away, and I stood up slightly, instinctively, the way you do when you expect someone to see you. She turned and went the other direction. Brent was at her elbow. I told myself I was being sensitive. I drank my wine. I danced with Boyd's sister. I told myself this was her day and it wasn't about me. It was around 9 o'clock when one of the wedding coordinators, a young woman in black with a headset, came to my table and crouched down beside me. She was apologetic in the practiced way of someone who has been asked to do something uncomfortable. "Mrs. Alcott," she said, keeping her voice low, "the bride and groom have asked me to let you know that. They'd prefer if you called it an evening. They feel the energy at the reception has become a little. They just think it might be better." I looked at her. "Are you asking me to leave my daughter's wedding?" She couldn't hold my eyes. "They've arranged for a car." Boyd's sister made a sound beside me. I put my hand on her arm. I stood up. I picked up my clutch. I said quietly to Boyd's sister, "Don't make a scene." And then I walked out of that tent with my shoulders back, because I have been a woman for 64 years, and I know how to walk out of a room without giving anyone the satisfaction. The Coldenough, Poldenough, 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 Ida in the dark on the highway heading north. I did not call her that night. I did not call her the next day. I sat in my house in Sudbury and I tried to understand what had just happened. I went over every conversation from the past few months. I went over every glance, every carefully worded sentence from Brent, every moment my daughter had checked his face before answering me. I started to see the shape of it, the way you can suddenly see a figure in a pattern once you know to look. She called me on the Monday, 2 days after the wedding. I picked up because she was still my daughter. "Mom." Her voice was careful. Rehearsed, I thought, and then hated myself for thinking it. "I'm here," I said. "I wanted to call about the property." Not "I'm sorry." Not "can we talk about what happened?" The property. Brent and I have been speaking with a developer. There's a company that's interested in the Muskoka lot. It's a serious offer, Mom, really good numbers, and we were thinking with everything, with us starting a new chapter, we were hoping you might consider transferring the deed. The room was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator. I could hear a truck on the street outside. The text Thursday morning. It would be a clean transaction. Brent has a contact at a firm. They could handle the paperwork. Really straightforward. I thought of Boyd standing in the surveyor's office in 1986, signing papers with a pen that was out of ink and having to ask to borrow another one. I thought of my daughter at 16, standing on the dock at midnight looking at the stars, telling me she wanted to live there someday. "I'll need some time," I said, "to think." "Of course," she said. We'd love to move on this soon. The offer has a window." After I hung up, I sat for a long time without moving. There is a particular kind of grief that doesn't announce itself with tears. It's quieter than that. It settles in your chest like water finding its level and just stays there. I had lost Boyd. I had lost my mother. I knew grief. This felt different because the person was still alive and had chosen. I called my friend Harriet that evening. Harriet and I had been friends since our daughters were in the same playgroup in 1988. She had been through her own version of a difficult child. Not the same, but close enough that she understood the specific weight of loving someone who was hurting you. She listened without interrupting, which is a rarer quality than people think. When I finished, she said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said, "but I know I'm not signing anything I don't understand completely, and I know I'm not using anyone Brent recommends." Harriet said, "Good." The text morning while I called Linath, lawyer, not Brent's contact. I found my own, a woman in Sudbury named, well, it doesn't matter what her name was. What matters is that she had been practicing estate and property law for over 20 years, and she had an unhurried way of speaking that made me feel, for the first time in weeks, that I was on solid ground. I told her everything, not just the phone call about the property. All of it. The wedding, the coordinator with the headset, the checks I had sent, the pattern I had started to see. She listened. Then she said, "I want you to understand something about your position. That property is yours, fully and legally yours. No one can transfer it without your signature, and your signature is yours to give or withhold as you choose. What I want to make sure is that any decision you make is one you make freely, fully informed, and without pressure." "That's what I want too," I said. "Then let's talk about your options." We talked for 2 hours. She explained what a transfer of deed would actually mean, that once I signed, the property was no longer mine, that developer transactions of the kind being described were often complex, and the value I was told might not be what I ultimately received. That there were ways to protect the property for the future that didn't require me to give it up now. She mentioned a family trust. She mentioned my will. She mentioned the fact that my daughter, under Ontario law, had no automatic right to the property while I was alive. None of this was cruel. It was just true. I asked her what she would do in my position. She paused for a moment, which I respected. "I'd take care of the future of that property myself," she said, "on your terms, so that no one else can make that decision for you." Over the following 3 weeks, I did exactly that. I restructured how the Muskoka property was held. I updated my will with my lawyer's guidance. I made decisions about what I wanted to leave behind and to whom, and I did it with clear eyes and no pressure. It was, in a strange way, one of the most clarifying things I had ever done. Boyd had left me that land. I was going to decide what happened to it, and it was going to be my decision, made quietly and firmly, the same way I had walked out of that wedding tent. My daughter called twice more in that first month. Both times the conversation circled back to the property. The second window had extended, apparently. Brent had a colleague who could answer any of my questions. There was a timeline. I listened. I didn't argue. I didn't explain what I had done. On the third call, when she pushed again, I said, "I've looked after the property. It's taken care of." A pause. "What does that mean?" "It means it's taken care of," I said. "It means you don't have to worry about it." Another pause, longer. I heard her breathing. "Mom, did you?" "I made sure my affairs are in order," I said. "That's all I'm going to say." She hung up. She didn't call again for 6 weeks. I want to be honest with you, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering at this stage of my life. Those 6 weeks were not peaceful. They were not triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I felt like a woman who had protected something real and lost something else in the process, and those two things existed at the same time without canceling each other out. I missed my daughter. I missed the person I thought she was, or maybe the person I believed she was still becoming. I missed the version of her that stood on the dock at midnight and looked at the stars. I did not know how much of that person was still in there, underneath everything Brent had built up around her, and I did not know if I would ever get to find out. Harriet brought me casseroles twice. My neighbor shoveled my walk without being asked. Small kindnesses have a weight to them in hard seasons. I tried to remember that. My daughter came in December. She came alone. She stood on my front step in the cold, no luggage, and she looked older than the last time I had seen her. Not in a bad way. In the way that happens when someone has been thinking hard about something for a long time. I let her in. I put the kettle on. We sat at the kitchen table where she used to do her homework, and I waited, because I have learned that the most important things require a silence in front of them. He told me, she said finally, that he was going to divorce me after the development deal closed. He told me himself. I think he thought I wouldn't do anything about it. I set down my mug. I've spoken to a lawyer, she said. My own. I looked at my daughter, at the particular line of her jaw, which is the same as mine, which was the same as my mother's. When did he tell you? I asked. Before the wedding. She looked at the table. I know, Mom. I know what I did. Outside, the snow was coming down slowly, the kind that accumulates without hurry. You don't have to explain everything tonight, I said. I want to. I know, but you don't have to. She cried then, not dramatically, just quietly, with her hands around her mug, in the kitchen that had always been hers too. I did not tell her what I had done with the property that night. We didn't talk about any of that. We talked about her father a little. We talked about August at the lake. She asked me if we could still go, this coming summer. I told her I would think about it. That was the true answer, not yes yet, but not no either. There is something I keep coming back to, something my lawyer said in passing near the end of one of our meetings. I had asked her, almost without meaning to, whether she thought I had done the right thing, protecting the property the way I had, making those decisions alone, without telling my daughter. She thought for a moment. Then she said, "You did what you were entitled to do. Whether it was right is a different question, but I think you were trying to protect something that mattered." "Boyd bought it for her," I said. "He bought it so she'd have a place to come back to." "Then make sure she can still come back to it," she said. "That part's still up to you." I think about that a lot. What it means to protect something. Whether protection is the same as holding on, or whether sometimes it means leaving a door unlocked. The property is still mine. It will be, for as long as I am alive and of sound mind, and those are both things I intend to be, for quite a while longer. What happens to it after that? I have thought about it carefully, and the thinking isn't finished, and I believe that's allowed. My daughter left that December evening with her coat buttoned up and her cheeks still a little red. At the door, she stopped and turned around, and she looked at me for a moment in the way she used to look at me when she was small and had just been frightened by something, and she said, "I'm sorry, Mom, for the wedding, for all of it." I had been waiting 11 months to hear those words, and when they came they were smaller than I expected, and also larger, the way the most true things tend to be. "I know you are," I said. She nodded. She went to her car. I stood in the doorway in the cold and watched her headlights until they disappeared down the street. Then I went inside, poured the rest of my cold coffee down the sink, and made a fresh cup. And for the first time in a very long time, I sat down and drank it while it was still warm. What I know now, that I didn't know before all of this, is that you can love someone completely and still refuse to be diminished by them. that the two things are not in conflict, that protecting yourself is not the same as turning away. And that land, real land, the kind your husband drove 4 hours to stand on before he bought it, carries the weight of everyone who loved it. You don't hand that over for a development window. You hold it, and you decide on your own time what love looks like next. I keep thinking about that cup of coffee, the one I finally drank while it was still warm. It sounds like such a small thing, but after 14 months of cold cups and sleepless nights and phone calls that left me sitting in silence long after I'd hung up, drinking one warm cup of coffee at my own kitchen table felt like something I had earned back. What happened to me? What happened between my daughter and me? And what Brent spent over a year quietly engineering didn't come from nowhere. I've thought about this a great deal. Not with bitterness, though I won't pretend bitterness never visited, but with the kind of honest reckoning that comes when you finally stop flinching and just look at the thing directly. Brent was able to go as far as he did because people around him allowed it. My daughter allowed it. And I think she did so because she had stopped trusting her own judgment somewhere along the way. And I came close to allowing it too, not because I was foolish, but because I loved her. And love can make you extend more goodwill than the situation has earned. That's the text-batecrity. It isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself. When I walked out of that wedding tent, back straight, clutch in hand, not giving anyone the satisfaction of a scene, I wasn't being strategic. I was just refusing to become something smaller than I was. That refusal, quiet as it was, turned out to matter. It was the first step in a long chain of decisions that ended with me sitting in my lawyer's office, clear-headed, making choices about my own future on my own terms. And the clear-headedness, that took real work. I had to separate what I felt from what I knew. I felt like calling my daughter and asking her how she could do this to me. What I knew was that emotion without information is just noise. So I found my own lawyer. I asked my own questions. I understood what I was actually being asked to sign before I said anything at all. That kind of deliberate thinking, the willingness to slow down when everything in you wants to react, is what kept me from making a decision I couldn't undo. But none of it, not the composure, not the clear thinking, would have meant anything without the willingness to actually do the hard thing. To restructure that property and update my will and hold a boundary with my own child, the person I love most in the world. The kind of resolve doesn't feel heroic in the moment. It feels like grief wearing a practical coat. You do it anyway because the alternative is to let someone else decide what your life amounts to, and that is a thing I was not prepared to do. Boyd bought that land because he wanted our daughter to have a place to come back to. What I understand now is that I had to protect it precisely so that possibility could still exist. Giving it away under pressure wouldn't have been generosity. It would have been the end of everything he built it for. My daughter came back, not because of the property, because she finally looked clearly at what was happening and chose differently. That took its own kind of courage, and I don't underestimate it. We are not where we were, but we are somewhere real, and this summer we are going to the lake.